The small escape pod carrying young Jin pierced through Earth's atmosphere on a warm summer night. To anyone watching from below, it was just another shooting star in the spectacular meteor shower that lit up the sky over the forests outside Seoul. But this particular light wasn't a meteor at all. The pod's automatic landing systems deployed too late, sending it bouncing between massive pine trees before coming to rest in a secluded clearing. The impact left a shallow crater surrounded by scorched earth and scattered debris. For several minutes, the pod sat silent and still, its outer shell cooling from the fiery entry. Then, with a soft hiss, the door slid open. Jin blinked as he took his first breath of earth air. It felt heavy in his lungs, richer in oxygen than what he was used to. The moonlight seemed harsh to his sensitive eyes, which reflected the stars like tiny mirrors. He crawled from the wreckage, his thin, blue-tinged arms trembling with the effort. He was only 7 years old, small even by the standards of his own people. Born with a condition that weakened his muscles and affected his speech, Jin had never truly belonged among his kind. They were a species that valued physical perfection and clear communication, two things Jin couldn't provide. The scientific expedition that brought his parents near Earth had been his first journey away from the medical facilities where he spent most of his young life. When their ship encountered an unexpected energy storm, the crew had only moments to make impossible choices. Jin's parents, knowing their son would never survive the harsh judgment awaiting him if returned to their homeworld alone, placed him in the only working escape pod. "Find somewhere to belong," were his mother's last words as she pressed her forehead to his, their people's way of sharing deep emotion. The memory of her warmth lingered as Jin huddled beside the broken pod, shivering, despite the summer night. For the first 3 days, Jin didn't venture far from the crash site. He drank condensation that collected on leaves and ate nutrient packs from the emergency supplies in the pod. But when those ran out, hunger drove him deeper into the forest. Jin discovered that his body, so weak and awkward in his homeworld's stronger gravity, could move more freely on Earth. He couldn't quite walk normally, his legs still buckled after short distances, but he could climb using his stronger arms. This new ability saved him when hikers passed too close to his hiding spot one afternoon. Jin scrambled up into the branches of a tall pine, watching through the needles as humans passed below, talking and laughing in a language he couldn't understand. They looked so much like his people, yet so different. Their skin came in various shades of brown and beige, not the blue-tinged pallor of his kind. Their eyes didn't reflect light the way his did, yet they walked on 2 legs, had 2 arms, and their voices carried emotion just like his parents. As weeks passed, Jin created a shelter using parts of his pod and fallen branches. He learned which plants were safe to eat by watching the forest animals. Berries that birds ate were usually safe. Roots that deer dug up could be tested. His people had an ability to sense certain chemicals through taste, which helped him avoid poisonous plants. The nights were the hardest. Strange animal calls echoed through the darkness, and memories of his parents filled the quiet moments. Jin wondered if he would ever hear speech again, not just sounds, but words meant for him. Sometimes he practiced his own language, speaking to the trees and rocks, but the sounds came out wrong in Earth's atmosphere, the vibrations feeling strange in his throat. One night, during a thunderstorm, Jin huddled in his makeshift shelter as lightning split the sky. The crash of thunder reminded him of the explosion that had taken his parents' ship. He curled into himself, covering his ears, tears streaming down his face. For the first time since landing, he felt truly alone. But morning always came. As summer turned to early fall, Jin adapted further. He fashioned a walking stick from a straight branch, which helped him move faster across the forest floor. He discovered a stream where he could drink fresh water and even catch small fish with his quick hands. His skin, which could change pigmentation slightly with concentration, gradually shifted to a less noticeable pale shade that might pass for human in dim light. Jin began venturing closer to the forest edges, curious about the world beyond the trees. From a distance, he observed humans picnicking in clearings, hiking on marked trails, and once, a school group learning about local plants. He absorbed their language from afar, beginning to match words with objects and actions. 1 month after his arrival, Jin found an abandoned backpack beside a trail. Inside were treasures: a half-empty water bottle, a chocolate bar, and a small book with pictures of animals and their names. At night in his shelter, he traced the strange symbols beneath each picture, whispering the sounds as best he could. He was still alone, still lost, still a child without parents on a strange planet. But in those quiet moments of learning, something new took root inside Jin. Not just the will to survive, but the first fragile hope that perhaps, someday, he might find a new place to belong. The October morning dawned crisp and clear as Dr. Yoon loaded her research equipment into her old Hyundai. She checked her supply list one last time: sample containers, soil testing kit, camera, notebook, lunch, and extra batteries. Today she was investigating unusual growth patterns in a remote section of the national park outside Seoul. Plants growing in perfect circles that her colleagues dismissed as normal, but that she suspected might indicate something worth studying. Yoon wasn't supposed to be working today. At 42, she had promised herself she'd take weekends off, especially after the disappointment of her third adoption rejection last month. Single women with demanding careers aren't ideal candidates, the agency had told her gently. The memory still stung as she drove the winding road up into the mountains, but work had always been her refuge. The forest welcomed her with dappled sunlight and the earthy scent of fallen leaves. Yoon parked at the rarely used North Trailhead and shouldered her backpack. According to her research permit, she had access to areas typically closed to hikers. Good thing, too. The strange plant formations she wanted to examine were deep in the protected zone. After an hour of hiking, Yoon noticed something odd. Several trees had broken branches about 7 feet up, all bent in the same direction as if something had crashed through. Following this trail of subtle damage, she discovered flattened undergrowth and then, strangest of all, a perfectly circular patch where nothing grew at all. "What on earth?" she whispered, kneeling to examine the soil. Her testing kit showed unusual mineral content, nothing toxic but certainly not typical for this forest. As she photographed the area, something caught her eye: a tiny footprint at the circle's edge. Too small for an adult, but with an unusual shape, the toes slightly longer than a human child's would be. Yoon's scientific curiosity overpowered her. Caution. She followed more faint footprints barely visible in the soft earth leading away from the barren circle. They disappeared onto rocky ground, but now she noticed other signs: broken twigs at child height, a tuft of what looked like fabric caught on a thorny bush. The trail led her to a stream where the footprints reappeared in the mud. Yoon stopped, suddenly. There, drinking from cupped hands, was a child. At least she thought it was a child. Small, certainly, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with a thin frame and pale skin that seemed to have a bluish tint in the shadows. The child used a rough walking stick and moved with an uneven gait, shoulders hunched forward. Yoon's gasp gave her away. The child's head snapped up, eyes wide with fear, eyes that reflected the sunlight like a cat's might, just for an instant, before the child scrambled backward. "Wait!" Yoon called softly. "I won't hurt you." The child froze, head tilted as if trying to understand. Up close, Yoon could see it was a boy, dressed in what looked like pieces of a silver material combined with woven plant fibers. His hair was dark and matted, his face smudged with dirt. Slowly, Yoon set down her backpack and took out a protein bar. She unwrapped it and took a small bite, then held it out. "Food," she said clearly. "For you." The boy stared at her, unmoving. Yoon noticed how his chest rose and fell quickly, how his knuckles whitened as he gripped his walking stick. He was terrified, but something else showed in his face too. A desperate, aching loneliness that Yoon recognized from her own mirror. She placed the protein bar on a flat rock between them and backed away 3 steps. Then she sat down cross-legged on the ground, making herself smaller, less threatening. Minutes passed. Rain clouds gathered overhead, darkening the forest. The distant rumble of thunder made the boy glance up nervously. "Storm coming," Yoon said. pointing to the sky. She mimicked rain falling with her fingers, then made a roof shape over her head. I have shelter, in my home. The boy took one hesitant step forward, then another. He snatched the protein bar and retreated, sniffing it before taking a tiny bite. The flavor seemed to surprise him, and he ate the rest quickly. Fat raindrops began to fall as Yoon slowly stood up. The boy tensed again. "My name is Yoon," she said, touching her chest. Then she pointed to him, raising her eyebrows in question. The boy opened his mouth, making a sound unlike any language Yoon had heard, musical and complex. Seeing her confusion, he tried again, this time producing something close to recognizable speech. "Jae-jin," he managed, the name catching in his throat, as if his vocal cords struggled with the sound. The rain fell harder. Lightning flashed, followed by a boom of thunder that made Jin drop his walking stick. He covered his ears, eyes squeezed shut. Something maternal awakened in Yoon. Before she could analyze her actions through her usual scientific lens, she was gently placing her rain jacket around Jin's shoulders. "Come," she said, pantomiming walking. "We'll get sick in this rain." Jin looked up at the stormy sky, then back at Yoon's outstretched hand. For a long moment he seemed to weigh invisible options. Then, another crack of thunder decided for him. He picked up his walking stick and took a step toward her. Yoon didn't touch him, sensing his boundaries. But she stood nearby as he limped beside her, ready to help if needed. They moved slowly through the intensifying storm, this odd pair, a woman who had given up on motherhood and a child who seemed to have come from nowhere. Neither knew it yet, but this rainy day marked the beginning of something extraordinary. The scientist had discovered far more than unusual plant growth. She had found someone who needed her as much as she needed him. Yoon's countryside home sat on 3 acres of land, far enough from neighbors that visitors were rare and privacy abundant. The small 2-bedroom house with its wraparound porch had once seemed too large for just her, but now as she guided Jin through the front door, it felt exactly right. The boy stood dripping on her entryway rug, eyes darting everywhere at once. He flinched when she switched on a lamp, then stared at it with fascination. Yoon moved slowly, careful not to startle him further. "You're safe here," she said, though she knew he couldn't understand her words. It was her tone she hoped would reach him. That first night, Jin wouldn't sleep in the guest bedroom Yoon prepared. Instead, he created a nest of blankets in the corner of the living room, where he could see both the front door and the hallway. Yoon let him be, leaving a glass of water and some cut fruit nearby, before retreating to give him space. Through her bedroom doorway, she watched him examine the water glass, tapping it with careful fingers before taking a sip. His movements were tentative but precise. When he thought she wasn't looking, he studied everything in reach. The texture of the carpet, the pattern on the curtains, the remote control for the television. "Who are you?" Yoon whispered to herself. "And how did you end up alone in those woods?" Morning brought new challenges. Jin couldn't manage the stairs without help, his legs buckling after just a few steps. In daylight, Yoon could see the unusual structure of his joints, how his knees seemed to bend slightly differently than a typical child's. When she offered him breakfast, simple rice porridge with honey, he sniffed each spoonful carefully before eating. After a few bites, he pushed the bowl away and made a sound of discomfort. Over the next few days, Yoon created a picture system for basic communication. She drew simple images on index cards: toilet, water, food, sleep. Jin caught on quickly, pointing to the cards when needed. He proved remarkably intelligent, watching her actions with intense focus and soon mimicking her movements around the house. As a biologist, Yoon's curiosity was overwhelming. She began cataloging Jin's differences, his slightly bluish skin tone that changed subtly with his moods, his eyes that reflected light in dark rooms, his ability to hear sounds from another room that Yoon couldn't detect at all. When she showed him her laptop, he figured out how to use it within an hour, seemingly understanding technology intuitively. 2 weeks after bringing Jin home, Yoon converted her home office into a therapy space. Using her knowledge of human physiology and observing Jin's movements, she fashioned a walking frame from PVC pipes to help him move around more independently. She created exercises to strengthen his leg muscles, which seemed underdeveloped. "Your body isn't used to Earth's gravity," she told him one afternoon as they worked on standing exercises. The words slipped out without thought, and she froze, surprised by her own conclusion. Jin looked at her with those reflecting eyes and made a sound that might have been agreement. That night, Yoon couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table surrounded by notes and drawings. The evidence was impossible yet undeniable. Jin's difficulties with Earth gravity, his unusual speech sounds, the circular pattern where something had clearly crashed in the forest, the strange materials of his original clothing. "He isn't from here," she whispered to the empty kitchen. Not from Korea, not from Earth at all. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with wonder and a fierce need to protect him. The next day brought a new crisis. Jin began developing a rash after eating packaged foods. After careful elimination testing, Yoon discovered he reacted to common preservatives. His throat swelled slightly, his breathing became labored, and his skin developed raised welts. As a scientist, Yoon knew she should take him to a hospital. As the closest thing to a parent Jin now had, she knew what would happen if she did. Questions, tests, perhaps even government involvement. Jin would become a specimen, not a child in need. Yoon called in sick to work and turned her kitchen into a laboratory. With her background in biology and the medical supplies she kept for fieldwork, she created an antihistamine mixture that seemed to ease Jin's symptoms. For 3 terrifying hours, she monitored his breathing and heart rate, ready to rush him to the emergency room if her treatment failed. When Jin finally fell asleep, breathing normally again, Yoon collapsed into a chair beside him. She had made her choice. She would protect this child, whatever the cost. In the weeks that followed, Yoon transformed her home into a sanctuary. She installed blackout curtains for when bright light bothered Jin's sensitive eyes. She created a diet of fresh, unprocessed foods that didn't trigger his reactions. She developed a simple device using parts from her lab equipment to help Jin communicate. A box that translated the unusual frequencies of his voice into sounds humans could better understand. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jin used the communication device to produce his first clear words in Korean. "Thank you." Yoon's eyes filled with tears. She had failed 3 adoption interviews because agencies doubted her ability to balance work and motherhood. Now, ironically, she was using every bit of her scientific knowledge to care for a child no one else could. "We'll figure this out together," she promised Jin, not knowing if he fully understood. But when he cautiously placed his small hand over hers, his skin warming to match her temperature, she knew some meanings transcended language and even worlds. This unusual sanctuary they'd created wasn't just for Jin's protection. It was becoming the home Yoon had always longed for, but never believed she'd find. 6 months passed like water through cupped hands. Winter turned to spring, and with the changing season came remarkable progress. Jin now moved around the house using specially designed leg braces that Yoon had crafted from lightweight materials in her university lab after hours. His Korean vocabulary had expanded to over 300 words, though his pronunciation remained unusual, with musical tones that revealed his non-human origins. Yoon created a cover story. Jin was her adopted son from a remote province, born with rare physical and developmental challenges. She homeschooled him, explaining to curious neighbors that traditional schools couldn't accommodate his special needs. Most accepted this without question, offering only sympathetic smiles when they saw the boy's awkward gait. On a warm April afternoon, Yoon sat with Jin at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks. She was teaching him mathematics, though teaching wasn't quite the right word. Jin absorbed numbers like sunlight, solving complex problems with ease while still struggling to tie his shoelaces. 7 times 8? Yoon asked, pointing to the multiplication table. Jin wrote the answer, then added something else. Strange symbols that looked like flowing water frozen in place. "What's this?" Yoon asked. tracing the unfamiliar script with her finger. Jin pointed to the numbers, then to the symbols. "My numbers," he said in his musical accent. "From home." It was the first time he'd voluntarily shared anything about where he came from. Yoon's heart quickened, but she kept her expression calm, not wanting to frighten him back into silence. "Would you teach me?" she asked. That simple question opened a door between them. Over the next few weeks, Jin revealed more about his world through drawings and his growing Korean vocabulary. He described a planet with 2 moons and dense purple forests. He explained how his people communicated not just with sounds, but with subtle changes in skin color, a concept Yoon found fascinating from a biological perspective. "Why you alone?" she finally dared to ask one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. Jin was quiet for so long that Yoon thought he hadn't understood. Then he took her hand, something he rarely did, and placed it against his chest where his heart beat in an odd rhythm, stronger than a human heart with an extra flutter between beats. "Broken," he said, then pointed to his legs. "Not good there. Parents." He made a gesture like something flying away, then falling. His eyes reflected the last light of sunset as he added, "Ship bad. They put me in small ship. To live. The May." Simple words carried such weight that Yoon had to look away to hide her tears. She understood sacrifice, how parents might send their child into the unknown rather than watch him die. Later that night, as Jin slept, Yoon's doorbell rang. Her brother Tae stood on the porch, laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "Surprise visit," he announced with a grin. "My project finished early, so I thought I'd crash here for a few days before heading back to Seoul." Yoon's stomach dropped. Tae didn't know about Jin. Nobody did. She'd been careful to keep their life private, knowing how dangerous exposure could be. "It's not a good time," she began, but Tae had already stepped past her into the hallway and frozen at the sight of Jin's drawings taped to the wall. Sketches of strange landscapes, diagrams of stars in unfamiliar arrangements, and the flowing script of his native mathematics. "What's all this?" Tae asked, moving closer to examine a particularly detailed drawing of what looked like a spacecraft. Before Yoon could answer, a small voice came from the darkened living room. "Hello?" Jin stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes reflecting. The hallway light like tiny moons. In the dim light, the bluish tint of his skin was more noticeable than usual. Tae's eyes widened. He looked from Jin to Yoon, questions forming on his lips. "I can explain," Yoon said quickly, heart pounding. What followed was a night of revelations. To Yoon's surprise, Tae listened to her impossible story without interruption. A computer programmer who had always loved science fiction, he seemed more fascinated than frightened by Jin's presence. "So you've been hiding an alien child for 6 months, he finally said, shaking his head in amazement. "My boring scientist sister." "Are you going to report us?" Yoon asked, the fear she'd carried for months finally spoken aloud. Tae looked at Jin, who had fallen asleep on the couch between them. "And let them turn him into a lab specimen?" "Never." The next morning, Tae pulled out his laptop. "I have an idea," he told Yoon. "Jin's having trouble communicating because his vocal structures are different from ours, right? But his mind works perfectly." Over the next week, Tae created a specialized program, a communication device far more sophisticated than Yoon's makeshift solution. It analyzed the unique frequencies of Jin's speech and translated them into clear Korean. For the first time, Jin could express complex thoughts easily. The first full sentence he shared through the device brought tears to both siblings' eyes. "Thank you for finding me in the forest when I was afraid." With Tae's help, their small family circle expanded. His connections in the technology sector provided Jin with medical care through a doctor who asked no questions. Believing Jin had a rare genetic condition, when questions arose about Jin's lack of official documents, Tae knew people who could help with that too. People who believed in helping children regardless of bureaucratic obstacles. By summer, Jin had legal adoption papers listing Yoon as his mother. The documents wouldn't withstand deep scrutiny, but they provided a layer of protection, a bridge to a more normal life. One night, as the three of them watched stars from the back porch, Jin pointed to a faint cluster barely visible to human eyes. "Home," he said simply. Tay put his arm around the boy's thin shoulders. "No, buddy. Home is here now." Jin smiled, his first true smile since arriving on Earth. "Yes," he agreed. "Home here now." 2 years had passed since Jin's pod crashed in the forest. The calendar on the kitchen wall showed September, marked with a red circle around today's date, Jin's first day of special education classes at the local school. 3 days a week, for 2 hours each morning, he would join 8 other children with various physical challenges. Yoon checked his backpack one last time. Communication device disguised as a tablet, emergency medication for his food sensitivities, the special sunglasses that protected his light-sensitive eyes, and the small smooth stone from the stream where she had found him. His lucky charm. "Ready?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nervousness. Jin nodded, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing jeans and a long-sleeve shirt that covered the faint blue tint of his skin. The leg braces hidden under his pants had been dramatically improved through Yoon's research. She had published a paper on innovative mobility solutions for children with rare muscular conditions, careful to change enough details that nobody would connect it to Jin specifically. The paper had caught attention in medical circles. What began as a way to help one child had evolved into something bigger. Yoon now led a small research team developing affordable mobility devices for children throughout the region. Parents from across the country wrote to thank her for giving their children more independence. None of them knew that the inspiration came from a boy from the stars. The drive to school was quiet, Jin looking out the window at the familiar landscape that had once been so alien to him. When they arrived, Yoon knelt before him at the school entrance. "Remember what we practiced," she said softly. "If anyone asks about your accent, I tell them I came from far north near the mountains," Jin finished. His voice still carried that musical quality, but the communication device Tay had refined helped smooth the unusual frequencies into something that sounded merely like an interesting accent. "And if you feel sick or scared, I call you right away," he said, touching the phone in his pocket. Yoon hugged him, inhaling the clean scent of his hair. For a moment she remembered the frightened child from the forest, and her chest tightened with emotion. "Go," Jin whispered. "I'm okay." She watched him walk through the doors, his gait only slightly uneven now. The teacher, Mrs. Yoon, greeted him with a warm smile. They had met her last week during orientation, and Yoon had carefully explained Jin's rare condition, without giving details that might raise questions. That afternoon, Yoon joined her monthly support group, parents of children with mobility challenges who gathered to share resources and encouragement. When she first started attending 6 months ago, it was partly to maintain Jin's cover story, but these meetings had become genuinely meaningful. "Jin started school today," she told the group. "I was more nervous than he was." Gentle laughter rippled through the room. These parents understood the unique mixture of pride and fear that came with watching your different child face the world. "How's the new plant communication research going?" asked Minho, whose daughter used one of the mobility devices Yoon had designed. Yoon smiled. The research was actually Jin's idea. He had noticed that earth plants responded to frequencies humans couldn't hear. His observations, filtered through Yoon's scientific expertise, had led to discoveries about how certain sound waves could stimulate growth in struggling crops. The university had enthusiastically funded further studies after initial tests showed promising results for areas with poor soil quality. "It's going well," she said. "We might have results by spring." Later that evening, Tay arrived for his weekly dinner visit, bringing groceries and news. As they ate together at the kitchen table, Jin excitedly described his first day of school. The new friends he'd made, the art project they'd started, how nobody had asked too many questions about his unusual voice. After Jin went to bed, Tay pulled out his laptop with an unusually serious expression. "There's something you need to see," he said, typing rapidly. "It was detected by the Radio Astronomy Center yesterday." He turned the screen toward Yoon. On it was a signal pattern, complex, waves with a mathematical precision that couldn't be natural. It's coming from the direction Jin pointed to that night, Tae said quietly. The star cluster he called home. Yoon stared at the screen, her throat suddenly dry. What does it mean? Nobody knows yet. The official interpretation is that it's just cosmic background noise. But I have a friend at the observatory who recognized patterns similar to what I showed him from Jin's writing system. Tae lowered his voice. Yoon, I think they're looking for him. The possibility had always lingered at the edges of their minds, that someday Jin's people might come searching. Now that it seemed real, Yoon felt a cold fear grip her chest. What do we do? She whispered. Before Tae could answer, a small voice came from the hallway. I heard you. Jin stood in the doorway, his special nightlight casting soft shadows across his face. Jin, Yoon began, but he shook his head. I don't want to go back, he said simply, his voice clear and determined. My home is here now. He climbed onto a chair between them and pointed to the signal pattern. With careful movements, he traced certain sections. This means lost one, he explained. And this is a question. Tae looked at him with amazement. Can you answer them? Tell them you're safe? Jin nodded slowly. But not where, not exactly. Together that night they crafted a response using Tae's equipment and Jin's knowledge. A message that would travel across the stars to tell distant searchers that the child they sought was alive and well, but not coming back. Jin insisted on adding what he called the happiness pattern to show he wasn't being held against his will. As the message transmitted from a remote setup Tae established far from their home, Jin stood between Yoon and Tae on the back porch, looking up at the night sky. His hand found Yoon's and squeezed gently. When I crashed here, I thought I lost everything, he said softly. But instead I found where I belong. Yoon pulled him close, thinking of the frightened boy from the forest and the confident child he was becoming. Different worlds had collided by chance, and somehow against all odds they had built something beautiful from the collision. A family that transcended biology, language, and even the stars themselves.